and it is 2 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. There will be more folks joining us, as we go along. But we have a lot of information to get through, a lot of helpful information for you all. So I will launch now. Hi, and welcome to Kayaking the Laguna, our last virtual community education program of 2020. Wow, there's been a lot of them. My name is Allison Titus, and I am the Community Education Manager here at the Laguna Foundation. And I'm joined today by Christine Fontaine, our Education Director here at the Laguna Foundation. She will be managing the chat and providing a little bit of tech support behind the scenes. So thanks for being here today. If you are just joining us, please feel free to say hello in the chat box. And I have another special prompt for you. After you say hi and say where you're tuning in from today, I'd love for all of us to do a little rain dance in our seats. Because of the unique nature of the Laguna, without rain, there is no kayaking. So we really want to make it come down. So do your favorite rain dance move, and then maybe add some rain emojis, a rain prayer, or other description to the chat box. We'd love to see it. Hopefully that will help bring the rain this month. So I'd like to introduce Sonoma Ag and Open Space and thank them for their support of this special program. Established by voters in 1990 through a 1/4-cent sales tax, Ag and Open permanently protects the diverse agricultural, natural resource, and scenic open lands of Sonoma County for future generations, including the Laguna. To date, Ag and Open Space has protected and is responsible for the ongoing stewardship of nearly 118,000 acres of working and natural open space in Sonoma County. We'll learn a lot more as we go along about how this work of protecting open space relates directly to the Laguna de Santa Rosa and relates to slowing floodwater to the Russian River and even recreational opportunities like kayaking. So someone out there, there's a lot of Laguna experts out there in the crowd. Does anyone have any guesses about the role that open space, including both working and natural lands, plays with kayaking the Laguna? You can get your best guesses out there. It's a friendly crowd. Put your guesses in the chat, and we'd love to see how much local Laguna ecosystem knowledge is out there. So a little bit more about the Laguna Foundation and what we do. We are a nonprofit organization based in Santa Rosa that works to restore, conserve, and inspire public appreciation for the Laguna de Santa Rosa wetlands. The Laguna is a wetland and a waterway, and you'll see today the whole range of conditions that can make the Laguna. And it's also a watershed, which we'll talk more about. Some of you may live in the Laguna watershed if you live in Cotati, Rohnert Park, Santa Rosa, or Windsor, or maybe even parts of Sebastopol. The Laguna de Santa Rosa faces important issues that drive our restoration, conservation, and education work today. In more modern history, it's gone from being described as devoid of life in the 1970s to being designated as a wetland of international importance in 2011, just about 10 years ago, because of the incredible biodiversity that is found here, especially the birds that migrate and stop in the Laguna, and for the rare species found in our vernal pool ecosystems. Even with that amazing designation, there's still a lot of work to do. The Laguna today has poor water quality, high amounts of introduced species that threaten the varied biodiversity that makes it special. And many people don't know why the Laguna is so important or even where it is, even though it sustains over 250,000 people in Sonoma County, in addition to the plants and animals that we love. So we, the Laguna Foundation, are dedicated specifically to conserving this dynamic watershed. That's the first time I've said this word this webinar. I will say it a lot more: dynamic and watershed. We are working to restore wetland habitat, manage those introduced species, improve water quality through tracking sediment and restoring creek banks, and educating and inspiring future generations through our flagship program like Learning Laguna, through programs like these in our community education program. All of this we do with our partners so that the Laguna is a place for all to enjoy and protect for years to come. Our partners like Sonoma Ag and Open Space share common goals, such as protecting land for the future, improving watershed health, and educating the public about the incredible natural and working lands of the county. And they support programs like these as well as Learning Laguna. So we have a lot to thank them for. And this program, as well as the others I mentioned, is made possible with your support of these initiatives and organizations. So some Zoom reminders. Some of you have been with us for a lot of these Zooms, but some of you out there maybe have only been on Zoom once or twice or are new to this format. And so here are a couple of my notes for a successful webinar experience. Number one, as I said, we would love to see your questions and see who's out there. And the best way to do that is to say hi in the chat box, which you can find by hovering your cursor, your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then the option to select the chat should pop up. And then if you click on that chat box icon, you'll see there's a little part that says type message here. That's where you can type what you want. But right above that, there's this really small, easy to miss gray drop-down menu. And that's where you can select who to chat with. If you want everyone to see your comment, then you would select all panelists and attendees. If you just want to chat with Christine and myself, you would put all panelists there. Easy thing to miss. And just so you know, I will probably have my video off while I go through some of the slides. I might turn it on for some of the more nitty-gritty detailed slides with a lot of data and maps. But otherwise, for the beautiful photos, feel free to make your screen big and enjoy the beautiful photography we have of kayaking on the Laguna. And we will have time, hopefully, for questions at the end. And you are also welcome to reach out to me after the webinar via email with any other kayaking questions. We have a wealth of kayaking expertise on our staff, and we are happy to help. So just a little tidbit about myself and the background that I have with kayaking. Who is giving you this webinar after all? I have had the fortune to have a lot of different kayaking experience. I went to school at UC Santa Cruz, and I went on a National Outdoor Leadership School month-long expedition in Alaska. 2 weeks of that was in 2014, and 2 weeks of that trip was spent kayaking in the Prince William Sound. That's this photo here. And it was incredible. And that's where I really learned all my skills involved with kayaking. And I went from there, I went on to be a sea kayak guide at UC Santa Cruz. I led trips out of the harbor down there in the Monterey Bay. And I also led expedition length sea kayaking trips. That's this photo down here for incoming freshmen for wilderness orientation. And that was for 5 summers in Tomales Bay. For those of you who are Tomales Bay enthusiasts out there, you can see that's Hog Island in the background. And that was a lot of fun. This is another picture from wilderness orientation of me kayaking. And then this photo is from my first day of work at the Laguna Foundation. That was in 2019. I had no idea that it would be so useful to have this kayak experience starting this job at the Laguna Foundation. But, my first day of work was an amazing day of kayaking, and I've led a couple outings in the Laguna since then. We also have other staff members with a lot of kayaking experience in the Laguna and just around Sonoma County. Christine is one of them. And then my coworker Brent was great for putting this presentation together, and he's been kayaking in the Laguna for a long time. So there is a lot to talk about with kayaking the Laguna, and we've just got an hour. Today, I'm going to cover how the Laguna watershed works and the role of the Laguna in slowing floodwater to the lower Russian River, which is actually really critical to understanding when and where to kayak. Then I'll talk about why kayaking the Laguna is the best way to experience the Laguna. I'll get into some real nitty-gritty logistics of kayaking the Laguna, how, when, where, and I'll be sure to send lots of resources to you in a follow-up email as well. And then I'll talk about some wildlife you may see while kayaking in the Laguna. Okay, so this is the Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed map. This fundamental topographic knowledge is very important for understanding how and when to kayak in the Laguna. What is a watershed, you may ask? It's a good question. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, a watershed is an area of land that drains all streams and rainfall to a common outlet, such as the outflow of a reservoir, mouth of a bay, or in this case, any point along a stream channel. Therefore, this boundary here, this dark blue, shows the area of land that drains all streams and rainfall out to the Laguna channel. That's what's marked here. This is the main channel. And then on to the Russian River. This is a 254 square mile watershed. And there are many creeks, tributary watersheds here that flow into the Laguna. The Laguna watershed is the largest watershed, the largest tributary to the Russian River. Do you know the watershed you live in? Do you live in the Laguna watershed? Feel free to call it out in the chat. We'd love to hear it. And if you don't know, that's okay. We encourage Googling it. You could find out now for the first time the watershed where you live. We support the movement to understand our sense of place based on our watershed, since this water connects and sustains us all. So here's a little bit more about how the Laguna watershed works. When there's a storm, rain makes landfall first in the mountains to the east side of the watershed. Rain and storm water travel downhill. And in the case of this watershed, they travel down the mountains here to the flat Santa Rosa Plain. That's this area kind of in the middle of the watershed. There's this steep Mayacamas here, Mayacamas Mountains, and then the flat watershed here. And water travels pretty quickly down to the Laguna through this network of small creeks and streams. So water flows through these creeks to the lowest point in the watershed, the Laguna de Santa Rosa, the main channel. The Laguna holds this water, backing up into some of the creeks and slowing the storm water in a natural holding basin at this low point, while some of it does continue to flow into the Russian River and out to the Pacific. We call this natural phenomenon flooding, even when it does not necessarily impact homes, farms, or businesses. And that's the term that I will use throughout the webinar to describe when the Laguna fills with water from rainfall. As you can imagine, water would flow even more quickly through these creeks down to the Laguna were it not for this abundance of open space that we have here in this watershed. Our wilderness, our farms, our parks. These areas absorb water into their soils and also have an important role in slowing floodwater to the Laguna and the lower Russian River. Without the open space we have and the Laguna's natural capacity to hold and slow stormwater, it is estimated that the lower Russian River from this point down would flood about 13 feet higher during those extreme flood events. Like I said, the Laguna is often described as dynamic, and the watershed system demonstrates some of that nature. This image shows that even more clearly. This blue on the map, if you remember, there was just this channel depicted on the previous map. This shows the flood capacity of the Laguna during a 100-year flood event. The Laguna is a unique natural feature. That's why it's got its unique name and is sometimes difficult to describe. And it grows like this during the winter, holding water when water is abundant, and then it shrinks during the summertime to more of that channel you saw earlier. This entire region shifted and responded to the seasons in a much more dramatic fashion before it was developed to look like it does today. Now, this change, the seasonal change, is best seen along the main waterway of the Laguna de Santa Rosa, the lowest point in the watershed. This is just one more visual aid to help you all picture how the Laguna changes with more water. This aerial image shows the area near the Laguna Environmental Center. You can see the main channel of the Laguna here, and it flows north towards the Russian River. This blue triangle is Delta Pond, which is a recycled water storage pond adjacent to Santa Rosa Creek. Here's a slightly more zoomed in aerial image. Again, we've got the main channel of the Laguna here, the Laguna Environmental Center, home of the Laguna Foundation, another tributary creek, Irwin Creek, and then this is the sliver of Delta Pond up here. This image is of the Laguna during a more dry season, perhaps in early summer. You can see that the Laguna is limited to the perennial channel banks right here. And that's kind of how that would look up close. This is how the Laguna looks during the dry season when the water is at its lowest, well within the established banks, looking more like a lazy river or a creek. So here's that aerial image again, and this might be a little bit of a stretch of your imagination here, but in the winter of 2019, when I first started at the Laguna Foundation, that was a big water year. This is when the historic flooding of the Barlow occurred. In February, the Laguna flooded, and this is the rough path of the water as it backed up from the main channel along Irwin Creek. So if you can imagine, this is a very rough sketch I put in here. All this water flooded this entire area. Imagine this being full of water. Sanford Road right here was underwater, as was a section of Occidental Road. And we couldn't get into our office through the main driveway. That's our driveway right there. We had to use the neighbors. Here's what that looked like up close. This is the water from the Laguna coming up the driveway, flooding back along Irwin Creek. This image is looking out from the Laguna Environmental Center towards Sebastopol. These telephone wires here follow Sanford Road. All of this here is water following up the swale into the field adjacent to the Laguna Environmental Center. So this is a different angle on that 2019 flood event. This type of event does not happen every year, and it was devastating and damaging in many ways, but it made for some excellent kayaking conditions. This is an example of a more extreme flood event, and there are a whole range of conditions to look for between the Laguna at its lowest, as we pointed out before, to these conditions that we saw in 2019. All of that is necessary background leading up to one of the best ways to experience this dynamic watershed for yourself, kayaking. Kayaking is a wonderful way to develop your relationship with the Laguna, to understand how it changes with the seasons, the habitat that it provides for wildlife, and to see firsthand the important role it plays in our larger Russian River watershed as well. When you are kayaking, you see and understand so much more about the Laguna. You see the awe-inspiring beauty, the expanse of open water that draws in waterfowl migrating across the Pacific Flyway, the partially submerged oaks that are adapted to this special ecosystem. You see how the Laguna sustains so many of us here in Sonoma County through creeks, streams, and rivers that flow through our neighborhoods. And you also see how we take the Laguna for granted. As the lowest point in the watershed, the water that flows to the Laguna picks up anything and everything along its path. This includes water from stormwater drains, pollution, trash, unwanted nutrients, and other waste. Kayaking shows how we need to treat the Laguna with proper respect and reverence by stewarding our local creeks, protecting that critical open space, and developing personal relationships with this special landscape. Kayaking is nothing new in this watershed. The Laguna has been traveled by boat for centuries. Indigenous people made boats out of the reed tule and used them to navigate the network of waterways in this area for various purposes. European settlers and others have also used boats in the Laguna for many years. This is also around the time development increased in this area and the Laguna began to be taken for granted. Around the turn of the century, it was extremely popular to boat and fish in the Laguna in the Lake Honeve area. This was a natural lake just outside of Sebastopol. There were resorts along the banks that attracted tourists from San Francisco. However, it wasn't always possible or pleasant to recreate in the Laguna during this time, depending on the season, because sewage waste and waste from the canneries was actively being dumped into the Laguna from the city of Santa Rosa and Sebastopol. Now we are learning to see the value of the Laguna and manage our waterways differently. You certainly don't risk kayaking in cannery waste any longer. We have passed critical laws to protect our water resources, such as the Clean Water Act, and have a better understanding of how to prevent flooding and pollution. People continue to recreate along the Laguna in boats and for various purposes, for play, for fishing, for photography, for hunting, and more. Okay, so at this point, I've sold you on why you should kayak on the Laguna. If you were here watching this webinar, you're probably already sold. But now you are here and you are wondering, how, when, where do I go? And all of these are great questions. And I have some helpful tips and resources for you. But I must tell you that ultimately, I can't tell you exact answers to some of these questions because of the conditions that I just described, namely the seasonality of the Laguna and the dependence on rainfall. You will need to develop your relationship with the Laguna and our local weather conditions to be able to make these decisions on your own. And this is some helpful information for getting started with that process. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the weather from the first storm of the season this year. It was really late, as we all remember and know. But this shows after the last storm of the season here in Sonoma County, whenever that may be, the Laguna loses water until the next storm. It loses it through draining water out to the Russian River and through evaporation. With our Mediterranean climate and with climate change, that means that the Laguna is usually dry from May until October, right? There is little to no rainfall and the Laguna enters its low and dry season. So this makes the kayaking season then usually from roughly December to March, when there's enough water to submerge obstacles in and near the Laguna and allow for some longer paddles. So come November and December, it's time to start watching for storms. And in Sonoma County, we already do this. We're already waiting for this time with bated breath because it marks the end of fire season. But you all, as Laguna kayakers now, should also watch and continue to monitor the rainfall once it starts. Because the ground needs to be somewhat saturated and the Russian River needs to be up before ideal kayaking conditions are reached in the Laguna. The Laguna needs to rise about 3 feet. This means there really needs to be some good storms before kayaking is a possibility. This storm that we had here mid-November, there was no rise in the water in the Laguna. it just stayed flat because that dry ground absorbed all that water. So it takes time. So after a couple storms, the ground's nice and saturated, the Russian River's up. Then it's time to start watching some data, to start watching these US Geological Survey water gauges to see when the water will reach high enough to allow for optimal kayaking conditions. And I have some specific numbers for you, but there's a little more to talk about first. First of all, the US Geological Survey, this is their National Water Information System, and that is a comprehensive distributed application that supports long-term storage of water data. And this is publicly available data. And, you know, it includes many, just like years of data that describes the stream levels, stream flow, reservoir and lake levels, and surface water quality and rainfall at various stations throughout the country. And this data is collected by automatic recorders and manual field measurements at different installations across the country. And this is one of them. So this gauge is one of them. Our local gauge that we use for determining kayaking conditions is on the main Laguna channel right there off of Occidental Road, right across the bridge. I will send you a link to that graph and data because that is the best way to monitor for kayaking conditions. So these gauges show the water level in feet above sea level. And so this is the feet above sea level here, and this is the date you can see here. And there are, once again, key numbers, but let's look at this pattern of water rise first, because that's really critical. So once a storm occurs, there's a little bit of lag in the water level rise that accounts for the time it takes for that water, as we learn, to drain down the mountains, go across the Santa Rosa Plain, and get to the Laguna. Once it reaches the Laguna, and this is along that main channel, the water levels will spike, as you see here. Okay, so it probably stormed, you know, sometime in this section here, maybe late on the 11th or 12th. And then the water comes down across the watershed to the Laguna. This is from that 2019 flood event again. So you can see here the peak is pretty dramatic. And graph aficionados may also note that this spike occurred in a matter of just over 24 hours right here. That's pretty quickly. And that water does not stay high up here or remain in the Laguna. Hence, once again, that dynamic nature of this system. It's not a lake or a pond. It continues to flow out to the Russian River, albeit a little more slowly than that initial spike. So it's in these few days after this peak, as the Laguna slowly drains, that you will find the best kayaking conditions, as you can see here. It's about 3 to 5 days or so after a storm event. Again, this is the graph showing the data from the historic 2019 flood event. So these are the more extreme conditions on the spectrum of kayaking and flooding conditions within the Laguna. The Laguna gauge was at 75 feet when this photo was taken by Brent Reed, our ecological program manager. He was out here checking things out in the Barlow. And this is really high. But once again, you can see that characteristic pattern, that spike in the water levels and the slower slide back down as it drains. So yeah, this isn't necessarily the kayaking experience you're probably looking for, although it is kind of exciting as well. It's worth noting that a lot of the extreme flooding we're seeing is due to development along the floodplain and losing that critical open space that I talked about earlier. Our open space and restoring habitat in the Laguna helps increase our resilience to these flood events. However, we also know that flood events are getting more dramatic and extreme due to climate change. So I've been just thinking myself that this puts kayak recreation in the Laguna in perhaps a new and interesting category of outdoor recreation, maybe climate change recreation, opportunities to see and experience the effects of climate change yourself in real time. Hopefully that inspires you to action in some way. Okay, so here's another date range, also from a pretty dramatic flood event in 2016, another wet winter recently. Once again, you see this pattern of that initial steep spike in water levels in the Laguna, then the slightly slower decline once the storm has passed. It's a pretty short window you're working with, really. And as you may imagine, this pattern is why it can be hard to plan kayak outings for the public at the Laguna Foundation. It's really storm dependent, really rainfall dependent. However, during wet years, so not this year, I'm sure you all, this is a dry year, but during a wet year, it can be slightly easier to predict. Sometimes the ground is saturated early on, the Russian River is full, and we have continuous storms through late January and February, and you can almost guarantee that there will be optimal kayaking conditions along the Laguna. Okay, so this slide is kind of the summary of everything we just talked about. These are your critical numbers you're going to want. I will be sure to send this to you in the follow-up email. The optimal kayaking conditions in the Laguna is after some precipitation has saturated the ground and the Russian River is up. It's usually after a storm, unless it's a really, really wet year. And here are those gauge numbers. At 58 feet, the water is good, pretty good for kayaking. And just so you have some sense of perspective, right now, the gauge at the Laguna reads 54.75 feet. So like I said, it's got to rise like 3 feet before it gets pretty good for kayaking. And then these are some other numbers that are good to know. At 61 feet, you can launch from the gate in the Laguna Environmental Center driveway and be able to paddle over the fences to get to the main channel. At 63 feet, Sanford Road floods. And at 69 feet, Occidental Road begins to flood at low spots. So this is getting up into that more extreme, dramatic flood event category, which gives some perspective that when the Barlow was flooded, it was at 75. It's pretty extraordinary. And just another tip, like generally it's better, more optimal to kayak in the Laguna in the early morning or the late afternoon because it's generally windier, midday here. Okay, more of this like great logistical information to help you get out there. There's been a few storms, imagine. The gauge on Occidental Road says the Laguna is at 59 feet and you want to plan a kayaking excursion as soon as possible because you know you've got a window of a couple days, maybe more. Where should you launch your boat? It's a great question. And this is one of the trickier parts of planning your adventure because as you've learned, the water boundaries of the Laguna are an ever-changing feature, right? Sometimes it's way up high, sometimes it's a little lower. Generally, the best kayak put-in is off of Occidental Road, right next to the bridge. Depending on the level of the flood, it can be a little bit of a walk or none at all. Really depends. Obviously, if Occidental Road is flooded, then you can't put in right there. And that means you may want to select another kayak put-in spot on higher ground, like this parking area off of Willowside Road here. I've never personally put in there, but this is from our kayaking brochure and has been vetted by some experts. So when it's a higher flood event, this is also an option. Generally, the higher the Laguna floods, the more access points there are. Sometimes you can put in right off of Sanford Road. My hope and vision is that someday there will be a large, safe, and easy public access point for kayaking along the Laguna. The open space is there, and the public interest is there. However, you all also now have some insight into why it might be challenging to plan and manage that spot, that hypothetical spot. Since the water boundaries change with every storm, it's hard to know where would be the most likely consistent access point where public parking doesn't also get submerged along with the put-in and where there isn't a long walk if down to the put-in spot if the water level drops quickly. So this is what we recommend for now, this Occidental Road put in, that regional parks pull out here, up here off of Willowside. And then there's a variety of access points. It's worth exploring to see what will work best for you along this main channel of the Laguna. Once you put in, there are only really a couple options. You can go north towards the Russian, or you can go south. This brochure points out where the rough ending points you will probably encounter due to the natural obstacles here. Kayaking south, you kayak through the really deep portion of the Laguna here. It's really great for beautiful sunset views, beautiful reflections on the water. Kayaking north from here takes you into some CDFW property, and this is where you're more likely to see more wildlife. You can ideally do both if you've got more time. But generally choosing one route or the other is helpful. And I would say north in the morning and then south in the evening is my preference. And I will send you the link to this brochure so you'll have it for reference. So this is the view of the route kayaking north as seen from the Bohemian Creamery just up the hill on Occidental Road from the Laguna Environmental Center. And this is the view kayaking south from the put-in on Occidental Road. Okay, so we've got some more information here, critical logistical information. Another thing that can be tricky about kayaking the Laguna is where to get a boat if you don't already have one. Winter isn't generally thought of as kayaking season in this area. Generally, it's cold, it's rainy, and the summer tourists along the Russian are long gone. Because the Laguna changes so frequently and isn't always available for kayaking, local outfitters haven't quite caught on to the recreation opportunity that it provides in the off-season for Russian River boating. However, I do have some suggestions and workarounds for this. And once again, hopefully with more recreational use and public support, more local businesses will offer rentals year-round that could be used in the Laguna. So one thing you can always do is borrow from friends or family. I have seen more boats on the tops of cars here in Sonoma County than ever, so I know they're out there. Another thing you can do on a normal, non-pandemic year is you can come on an outing with the Laguna Foundation or other organization. You can rent SUPs or kayaks from Clavey Paddle Sports in Petaluma. They are very helpful. They get you all set up to travel with the boats or the stand-up paddle boards in your car or on your car. This year, they are not renting kayaks due to COVID, but they are renting stand-up paddle boards. You can also rent stand-up paddle boards from Sports Basement. And I put other on there because, it's been a tough year for some of our local businesses. I would recommend just calling up if there's a place that you usually rent boats from to kayak on the Russian River. It's worth giving them a call and just seeing, if you can work something out for kayaking on the Laguna. I talked to Jim from You Can Kayak, and he was extremely helpful and open to the idea of trying to work something out for kayaking on the Laguna. So hopefully now that you have this information, you may be able to go to an outfitter and get a boat to use along the Laguna, even if they don't necessarily advertise it on their website. So as I said, we do very small kayak outings in normal years through the Laguna Foundation. We call these flash kayak outings because, like I said, hard to predict. You don't really get much warning. So you can just watch our website, subscribe to our e-newsletter, and that's the best way to find out about these trips. We have a pretty small fleet of boats. So these are really small, intimate tours of the Laguna. And all of our boats have been donated to us. And we are always looking to expand our fleet. So just wanted to put that out there. If you've got like a boat that a kid left behind at some point, that doesn't get used, send me an email. It might help us expand our fleet of boats. And here's some more good information. You do need more than a boat to kayak, but not a whole lot more. This is the gear I generally recommend for a kayak outing just about anywhere on flat water. So this is applicable if you go to Tomales Bay or out to the Estero as well. A lot of this information is applicable to that. You do need a personal flotation device. And I also recommend rain jackets and rain pants, mainly because when you're paddling, even if it's not raining outside, you'll splash water on yourself a little bit from the paddle. It just keeps you nice and dry and warm. Recommend warm socks, sun hat or warm hat, depending on the conditions. As you can see here, this is a picture of some Laguna staff members. And it was kind of a gray day, but bright still, filtered light. So we're all wearing our sun hats. Rain boots are great footwear for kayaking in the Laguna. It keeps your feet dry as you're getting in and out of the boat. And I also recommend a change of clothes, especially if you're going from farther away. Just, you know, this water, as we mentioned, it's the lowest point in the watershed, and you may want to wash your clothes or put them in a bag after you kayak, rather than, you know, going back inside your house covered in this water. I also highly recommend, this is optional, highly recommend binoculars if you have them for the wildlife viewing. And a camera is also nice. It's flat water, so I feel more comfortable recommending this in this setting rather than on the ocean. I think you're less likely to lose your electronics. Of course, I'm not, you know, don't quote me on that. If you drop your iPhone into the water, that's on you, but it is pretty unlikely, as long as you avoid these hazards that we have in the Laguna. If you come out with us on a trip in the Laguna, we'll go over, you know, a little bit about paddle technique, how to stay upright, how to stay balanced in your boat. Ultimately, though, it's flat water. You probably have a big boat, and the Laguna makes for pretty easy paddling. There are no waves and very little current. It's more like kayaking on a lake than anything else. However, once again, because the amount of water changes frequently and the Laguna floods over a variety of different types of land, there are some unique hazards to watch for that I will go over now. And these are some of them. So this is pretty common terrain to be kayaking through on Laguna. These are partially submerged willows. You got to watch for trees, shrubs, sticks, all kinds of stuff sticking out. You also have to watch for fences and signs that are underwater. This is a sign right outside the Laguna Environmental Center. It's pretty great. This is our sign, you know, in our driveway, partially submerged. There are fence posts to watch out for. That's a big one. And when you're watching for these hazards, you're really not worried about these things puncturing your boat necessarily. But if you hit them and you're not prepared for that impact, it could kind of throw you off balance and potentially knock you into the water. Once this is from 2019, again, this is Occidental Road. And yeah, there's just really all kinds of unexpected things you can find in the water. This is really not ideal. And you can see why it can be hard to tell where exactly the road, you know, the water begins and the road ends here. So it's just really important to be aware as you're out there kayaking of what's out there, things like this. There are floating objects in the Laguna. If you're really inspired about, you know, some creek Laguna stewardship, you can definitely pick up trash while you're kayaking. This is our Director of Restoration, Wendy, here picking up some trash that floated down the Laguna. But once again, you also want to watch out for that trash. You don't know how heavy it is, and, you know, kind of running into it unexpectedly could throw you off balance enough to make you take a spill. So lastly, as far as hazards go, small portions of the Laguna are managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they are selectively open for waterfowl hunting during the winter season. And I know this may be a little shocking to some, but hunting is yet another activity that the Laguna supports with proper management, it's a wonderful way to include more people in appreciating the Laguna as a natural resource. And I will say it's by no means a hunting destination, but some limited waterfowl hunting does occur through the winter. And really, it's pretty limited. Only the wetland portions of the Occidental Road Unit, that's what CDFW calls it. So this little section here is open to hunting. And hunting's only allowed by boat when the Laguna is navigable by boat. So when it floods as well, there's no hunting on foot. That season is generally between November and the beginning of February, and hunting is only allowed on Saturdays, Sundays, and Wednesdays during that season. And I'll include that. That's, I know, a good thing to remember. I'll include it in the follow-up email as well. Okay, we're going to end with, moving on past the hazards, the logistics. I hope that answered some of your questions, but we are going to end on wildlife you can see while kayaking in the Laguna. I would love it if you commented any Laguna critters that you've seen in the chat as we go along, and especially include them and note if you've seen them by a boat, by kayak. Bald eagles, believe it or not, are a fairly common sighting while kayaking. They've made a comeback in the Laguna in the last decade. You may see them while kayaking north, as I mentioned, from the Occidental Road put in. I had to start with that characteristic macrofauna to get your attention about the wildlife, but the fact is that bald eagles and all the other animals I'm about to talk about wouldn't be here without the food. The invertebrates you see here and the fish in the Laguna draw in the other critters and are the basis of the food web. Even though the Laguna is a very eutrophic waterway due to the impacts I mentioned earlier, there are many invertebrates and fish that are resistant or adapted to the pollution and the low dissolved oxygen environment. Pictured here is some zooplankton and mosquito fish and common carp. Many of the best mink, yes, mink, American mink sightings in the Laguna are by boat or by an early morning getting ready to kayak. If you think you see a small lone otter pup, what you are likely looking at is actually a mink. They have smaller tails than otters, can't see in this photo, but and they generally stick a little closer to land. The winter Laguna is famous for the migrating waterfowl. This is why it's great to bring those binoculars with you while you're kayaking. Many ducks and geese overwinter in the Laguna while their summer territory up north is frozen over. Here are some of the highlights of those special visiting birds you can see by boat. This is one of my personal faves. This is a bufflehead. They're really distinctive, got this beautiful white plumage. This is a female, has the cute little cheek patch here. This is a ruddy duck, has this blue bill, which can be hard to see on a gray morning kayaking, but they often have their tail up like this, and that's pretty characteristic. These are both kind of smaller ducks that you'll find here in the wintertime. These are some larger ducks you might see. This is an American widgeon. Got the northern shoveler here with their big, long, flat, distinctive bills. This is a northern pintail, which is just a gorgeous bird. They have really long tails that kind of stand up as well. And hooded mergansers, which are also just so beautiful. They can raise this crest that they have here. They're a little more elusive, and they've got this sharper bill for hunting fish. There are also year-round residents that we love to see. They are fun and they are common to see while kayaking as well. Got your American white pelicans here with their 9-foot wingspan, just amazing, huge birds. The great blue heron, which will fish along the sides of the Laguna. And we've got our egrets, Love this photo because it's got both the great egret and the snowy egret. Some of you may have, noticed that there are some key differences. They're hard to tell apart if you just see one, but the great egret has this yellow bill, snowy egret has the black bill, and you can't see it, but the snowy egret has these perfect, funny little yellow feet as well. So those are some fun differences to try and tell between the two. We also see belted kingfishers, also looking for fish in the Laguna. And the waterfowl will bring in peregrine falcons. I've actually seen a peregrine twice now while kayaking. And they are actually trying to hunt on the waterfowl that come and migrate to the Laguna oftentimes. And of course, you are pretty likely to see a river otter, which is just amazing and fun. There are families of otters that have been seen by volunteers and staff in the Laguna. They are bigger than the mink. They have big, powerful tails for swimming, and just a delight to see those in the Laguna. So those are some of the things you might see. We just went over a lot of information, short period of time. Don't worry, as I said, this webinar is being recorded and the valuable links and the gauge numbers I mentioned will be sent to you in an email. Above all, I hope this gives you a better understanding of the Laguna de Santa Rosa system and how to plan your own kayaking adventure to see this amazing, unique landscape feature at its best. Kayaking the Laguna is a beautiful, peaceful, and reflective activity for rest and for pleasure. You can take a short paddle at sunset, listen to the bird calls, float and just watch the sky change. It's different every single time. I hope I see you all out on the water once it's possible to get out there. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We've just got a few minutes here for some questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you again for being here today. So, Christine, do we have some questions in the chat? Outstanding presentation or outstanding questions that I didn't get to.
Yes, and that was an outstanding presentation, Allison. Thank you. So much great information, and I think you've really set everybody up for success. So good job. Yes, lots of people are asking about inflatables. So do you want to share your personal thoughts on using inflatable boats in the Laguna?
Excellent. That's a great question and a great idea. I've had some experience on inflatable kayaks, and that is a great option to use in the Laguna. Same information for put in applies. I would just be a little more extra careful with the inflatables around those hazards. But as I said, everyone should be watching for those, maybe especially so with an inflatable, which is slightly more subject to damage if you run into something. But that's an awesome alternative as well. I don't see any reason not to use them. And they are more common, I think, than having a big hardshell boat.
One other quick question. Someone was asking about bringing kids out there. They have a 7-year-old and they're thinking about going kayaking with their kids. What would you say to that?
Well, oh man, this would be a great question for Brent. He's a parent and I think has taken his kids out on the Laguna. I would say the Laguna is a great place to kayak with kids. As long as you're watching out, it is flat, it's easy. You can kind of, it's best after a storm. So you're looking for ideal weather conditions. You can, have your kid on your lap and be kayaking with your paddling over there. They can be sitting in the front of a double. Generally, I think it's a good idea. Definitely easier to kayak than the ocean. So a great place to get your kids hooked on kayaking.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that covers most of the questions. There were people sharing observations of bald eagle and seeing river otter and even a mink right from the Joe Rodota Trail. So staying on land and looking at the Laguna and seeing a mink. So it's fun to read what people have seen out there.
Yeah, that is great.
I think that covers most of the questions. Someone was asking about a larger raft. So would a bigger inflatable raft be good? I keep thinking about all those trees that are poking up and the vegetation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a raft might be a little harder to navigate in the Laguna just because of those. It's a small water feature relatively most years. On a big flood year, maybe, but even then you're really working with some narrow margins as far as those submerged trees and fence posts go. So that might be better on like out at Bodega Bay or something like that.
Okay, one more. And this is in regard to getting out of your boat. So if you're kayaking along the Laguna and enjoying the sights, what would we say about getting out? Because most of the Laguna is in private ownership. So let's talk about that for just a second.
Good question. I generally get out in the same place I put in. That's usually my practice. I don't really do like a start one, like a shuttle, just because there are so few public access points to the Laguna. Once you're on the water is public, but all the land surrounding it, most of it is not. So best practice would be to put in and get out in the same spot where you've likely parked your car. You could go from public access point to public access point, but I will say that for that to work, the conditions would have to be perfect. And as you have probably gathered, hard to nail that exactly right. So most likely one spot will be better than the other as far as public access goes. And yeah, we don't recommend getting out on private land unless you know the landowner personally and have talked with them about accessing it from that point. Or if you are one of those people who has land along the Laguna, great. But yeah, public access points are much easier to manage and definitely where you should be getting in and out.
All right, I think that covers it. Lots of people saying, yes, I've gone out with kids as young as 10 and 7, and it's been a great experience. So any closing thoughts on our webinar today?
Just thank you all for being here. I really, like I said, it is just one of the best ways to learn about the Laguna. And I love hearing that all of, people are planning to take their kids out or have already. I think that this recreation opportunity is really unique and really worthwhile. Like I said, I hope those rain dances worked and that we get some good rain and we can all get out there this winter. Thank you all for being here, and check your email for that follow-up coming later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Bye, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison, and thanks everyone for being here. See you next time.
See ya.